I recently got in a debate with somebody who insinuated that pride doesn't really matter anymore because LGBTQ plus people have rights now. This was a person who very much kind of spouted the, well, why isn't there a straight pride month kind of a thing? And of course, those types of conversations, if a person's going to approach from that vantage point, that it really is not going to be a productive conversation. But it really had me thinking about the fact that pride matters now, very much so in 2025 for a variety of different reasons. Now, I'm going to be talking about this at length, and I'm going to be talking about some news stories that are directly connected to this conversation thereabouts. But I think that in 2025, obviously, there has been a change in presidential administrations. We are under a lot of threat. There's been a number of legislative attempts and successes that have directly impacted the LGBTQ plus community, whether on the federal level or on the state level in a variety of different states. If you go do a Google search, you can find some pretty straightforward statistics on that. But there has also been a lot of reports about different institutions, stakeholders, investors pulling back from supporting Pride because they are afraid of the financial ramifications, or of maybe it was just performative in the first place, so they didn't really feel the need to invest anymore. But despite that, I think that Pride is still holding on tightly, and it still has people supporting it, and we are still celebrating it regardless this fear, because we're not going to let anybody back us into a corner and convince us that celebrating our stories and our histories and our community is not worthwhile. We're not going to let anybody do that. But I want to remind everybody why Pride matters from the vantage point of a few different current events. And the first current event that is a particularly unsettling one is the death of an actor. And I don't know if you've heard about this happening, but there recently was a very brutal murder in San Antonio, Texas, um, of the actor Jonathan Joss. You probably know him from King of the Hill. He voices the character in King of the Hill. He's not only part of the LGBTQ plus community, he's also Indigenous. And a couple of days ago, literally the first day of Pride Month, he was shot in front of his husband by an angry, disgruntled neighbor. And it was a very unsettling news report. It's been shaking the LGBTQ plus community. And the husband has reported that this neighbor was spouting anti-LGBTQ plus slurs prior to this. So obviously it's alleged based on like the vantage point of the husband. And the husband actually um, shared a kind of like a statement that I wanted to talk a little bit about as well, that takes the form of this. So essentially, his husband Tristan said that my husband Jonathan Joss and I were involved in a shooting while checking the mail at the site of our former home. That home was burned down after over 2 years of threats from people in the area who repeatedly told us they would set it on fire. We reported these threats to law enforcement multiple times and nothing was done. Throughout that time, we were harassed regularly by individuals who made it clear they did not accept our relationship. Much of the harassment was openly homophobic. When we returned to the site to check our mail, we discovered that the skull of one of our dogs and its harness was placed in clear view. This caused both of us severe emotional distress. We began yelling and crying in response to the pain of what we saw. While we were doing this, a man approached us. He started yelling violent homophobic slurs at us. He then raised a gun from his lap and fired. Jonathan and I had no weapons. We were not threatening anyone. We were grieving. We were standing side by side. When the man fired, Jonathan pushed me out of the way. He saved my life. Jonathan is my husband. He gave me more love in our life and our time together than most people ever got. We were newlyweds. We picked Valentine's Day. We were in the process of looking for a trailer and planning our future. He was murdered by someone who could not stand the sight of two men loving each other. As I mentioned before, it like there are a lot of news reports, even though the San Antonio police are saying that there is no evidence of this being a hate crime, and some media has kind of been latching onto that as well. Personally, like to me, it looks like a hate crime, which, I mean, if there's this history of a neighbor saying these horrible things and then this I mean, regardless if it like it was still a murder and it was still horrible and like no one should ever have to experience this. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that many times throughout history, whenever a member of the LGBTQ plus community has been the victim of a hate crime, police and often the media have claimed them not to be hate crimes from the get-go. Case in point, when Matthew Shepard was tied to a fence post in rural Wyoming after being brutally beaten and then subsequently died of his injuries days later, the police and media were also at that time claiming that it was not a hate crime. And there is this very unsettling pattern throughout LGBTQ plus history where when atrocities have happened to us, they've been very much minimized and reduced to being something reduced to it seeming like we are making it more than it actually is when our like it is valid to have this conversation. Like a hate crime is a hate crime. So my heart goes out to his family and his friends, his husband. It's whenever something like this happens, I think those of us in the community really have like this reality check where we're like it can be dangerous depending on where you are. And that's why we have to and that is why pride is important, because pride offers us safe spaces where we can commune, where we can celebrate those histories and make those connections. And I know there are a lot of people who are afraid of going to Pride this year, and understandably so. Like everyone can make their decision on whether they choose to go or not. But I think we need to make sure that we hold steadfast to community, because community is how we remind these hateful people out there that we matter and that we're not going anywhere, right? Another news report that I really wanted to talk a little bit about um, is the recent news about the Trump administration um, wanting to label Pride Month as Title IX month as a means to directly attack the trans community specifically. And like obviously this has been circulating quite a bit. This is not the first time that this administration has directly stated that it wants to do away with Pride Month. I'm just saying, renaming it based on an administration is not going to deter us from celebrating Pride Month. I'm just saying. But this is just yet another manifestation and example of powers that be attempting to partition us or minimize us in some fashion, right? So one other news report that I wanted to note was, and this one came out in like April, I think, but it's still been in the kind of like conversation taking place in the media and amongst LGBTQ plus groups. But this conversation centers around the current administration wanting to scale back or completely do away with LGBTQ plus support funding for the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So these are like LGBTQ plus youth specific services that the administration wants to do away with. And I don't remember reading like any particular explanation for why they want to do away with it, but the truth is, like, this literally helps 1.2, well, it has provided more than 1.2 million crisis contacts over the years. Like, regarding the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, or the 998, that's what it used to be called, the 998 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. I, in the past, have used it as a form of support when I was back in college. Like, it is a very crucial resource for people in the LGBTQ plus community, and cutting it would be very damaging. The CEO of the Trevor Project here says, this article, by the way, comes from the Trevor Project, says that suicide prevention is about risk, not identity. Ending the 998 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline LGBTQ plus youth specialized services will not just strip away access for millions of LGBTQ plus kids and teens, it will put their lives at risk. So recently they have, I think they recently drafted a letter as well, calling this out in an attempt to try to save this funding that is very crucial for the 998 Crisis and Suicide Lifeline. So I guess the reason why I'm drawing your attention to all of these different things is there is this continual movement toward damaging the LGBTQ plus community, or minimizing the LGBTQ plus community. I draw attention to this because left and right, I have people who don't want to hear about it, and they will simply say, well, like, oh, there's nothing going on. There's nothing impacting you or your community. And it clearly is here. It just because one person may not see it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So again, going back to why pride matters. Pride matters because in telling our stories and sharing our history and educating, we can do our part in helping these individuals who don't realize that things are happening, that there is an entire history of things that have happened. And how do we keep history from repeating itself? By learning from it. That's why pride matters. Pride matters for a whole variety of different things, but I would argue right now of all times, that is one of the central priorities for why pride is significant. If you were wondering what you can do, there are things you can do. I have done a number of streams, sharing some resources and talking a little bit about like education and how we can like take some sort of political action. I will have those videos linked in a playlist here so you can go find them. But there are ways that we can take subtle action, whether it be from supporting a grassroots nonprofit organization to calling one of our local politicians and sharing our concerns, attending and supporting local pride events, to support those groups who are funding it, supporting LGBTQ plus creators, businesses, etc., supporting allies who support the community. Like, all of these things are incredibly important, and I think they are ways for us to be supportive. So yes, the fight is difficult, but we're in this together, my friends. And I hope that everything that I had to share here was not only illuminating, but also educational. And I'm hoping empowering in the very least. So anyway, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, click like, and thank you so much for supporting my work.